As social beings, all want good, healthy relationships of different kinds and styles. There's a lot of diversity, extroverts, introverts, different kind of cultural norms for relatedness, different settings, different functions that relationships serve. But we are joined, much as we all have a belly button, we all have a longing for satisfying, healthy, supportive, good relationships. So the question then becomes, what causes it? Think about relationships, and I try to practice in relationships or use relationships as a field of practice, as well as use relationships as support for practice. Okay? So in that context, we're talking mainly about human relationships, which for me are embedded in life altogether, particularly animals with a nervous system that are capable of having experiences. And one of the things that's really striking about human relationships is that here we are sitting, speaking with each other in 2017 with technology, and it all seems so modern and safe. And yet, where we're located had native people walking through here 8,000 years ago. And their ancestors were walking around Africa and Asia, and our ancestors 50,000 years ago, 190,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans. And their ancestors, reaching back 2.5 million years to tool manufacturing hominids, reaching back to 40 million years, the arising essentially and evolution of primates, back further 200 million years to mammals, profoundly social species, resting on another 400 million prior years of evolution of the nervous system. So when I think about relatedness, I embed it in a larger frame of causes and conditions that are enormously biological, in which our relatedness of so many kinds, including just ordinary things like how we take turns in conversation, or how we look into each other's eyes, or what we feel inside when it feels good or it feels bad. All of that has been profoundly shaped by the demands of life, the harsh school of evolution. And it's certainly the last several million years, arguably the primary shaper of the human nervous system, headquartered in the brain, have been the benefits of love, broadly defined. The survival benefits of cooperation, altruism, empathy, attachment, in a healthy sense, compassion, loving kindness, altruistic joy, being happy for the welfare of others. Those factors, as well as, of course, gossip, politics, envy, resentment, and jealousy, all of that together really enabled our ancestors in really tough conditions to live and pass on genes that passed on genes. So when I look at people getting ready for a dance in junior high school, or I look at politics today, or I look at what's actually happening back and forth between people who are having a challenge in their relationship, it's to consider it nested in the larger network of causes and conditions that is its frame. Including thinking a lot about, I'm a psychologist, especially grounded in developmental psychology and sort of the roots, if you will, really also being aware of the ways in which our sociability, our enormously relational qualities are extremely shaped by experiences in early childhood and, frankly, due to the negativity bias of the brain, particularly shaped, unfortunately, by painful, stressful, neglectful, sometimes abusive and traumatic experiences in childhood, particularly early childhood. It's sort of like there's a kind of a term from a famous paper by Selma Freiberg about parenthood, and the title of the paper is quite haunting and evocative, Ghosts in the Nursery, in the sense that we're all carrying around, in a sense, ghosts in our relationships, even at work, even superficial relationships with the driver on the bus you nod to on the way to your seat. We carry with us the ghosts, if you will, the remnants, the residues, the effects of our own personal childhood, surrounded by millions of years of other ghosts in the shaping of our embodied social evolution. A takeaway that's available to people based on the recognition of what's true is incredible gratitude. Like our capacity right now to feel connected, to feel friendly, let alone our capacities in deeply significant relationships, to feel in love, to feel loved, to feel cherished, to feel that you can really count on another person to catch you if you fall backwards, literally, if not figuratively, into their arms. The wonder of that and the joy of all that has been given to us. We couldn't possibly have earned it. It's been given to us through the hard efforts and through the suffering and deaths of millions and millions and millions of ancestors. So gratitude, like, thank you. I kind of think about these bumper stickers. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Like, I can relate. It's also true. It's not either or. It's also true. If you're not stunned by gratitude, you're not paying attention. If you're not awestruck, you're not paying attention. So, intimate romantic relationships. Well, it depends on what the issue is. I would say a couple things that really call out for me. One is that there is the way in which we're always needing some reassurance. And there's a tendency to push that need for reassurance away, to be cool, or to not look needy, or to not give other people an edge, because if they know we want that reassurance, then somehow it gives them power. But the real truth is, it takes courage to claim and own our radical dependency upon other people. We are as dependent as the most social species on the planet. We are as dependent upon social supplies of various kinds as we are dependent upon material supplies like air and water and food. So to come to peace with and relax around and just, yeah, okay, we're all dependent, is really an important step. So in a relationship, a romantic relationship, to be brave enough to own your dependencies and to be kind enough and insightful enough, empathic enough to see the dependencies of the other person, and to not do what often people do reflexively, which is to dismiss their dependencies, often through an internalization of a dismissal of one's own dependencies while growing up as a child. Dismissal from parents, siblings, the other kids in school, clueless teachers, coaches, etc. So we tend to internalize and do to ourselves and others what was done to us. So instead of doing that kind of dismissiveness of the yearning and longing for security and reliability and reassurance, and do I matter to you? Do I matter enough to you that you let me land in your mind and heart and being? That I matter enough to you that you will actually, I had a teacher use the term the bodily sacrifice of attention. Will you really give over to me for a minute, 1 minute in a row of fully present attentiveness? We want to know the answers to those things, and it's important to be able to recognize those questions alive and present in the minds of other people. And on the basis of that, be really responsive to one's own needs for reassurance and dependency, and narcissistic supplies they're sometimes called, as well as other things, and that in the other person. And then what that takes me to, if you really think about it, to deliver the goods in that high baud rate kind of sense, a rich soup delivered to another person rather than them feeling like they're breathing through a straw. What's it take to do that? What's it take to be that receptive to another person? And also that overflowing with supplies for them, and also that willing to ask for what you need yourself. What's it really take? That then goes to the second great wing of relatedness, which is autonomy. The two great wings, if you will, of human life are intimacy and autonomy. And the bird needs both wings to fly. And they feed each other. It's not either or. But So my point is, I've been speaking here about the intimacy side of it. But to be able to sustain that kind of intimacy, you need to be really centered in your own place. You need to feel entitled to claim your own ground. I think of the metaphor, if nothing else, perhaps the reality of the Buddha's Night of Awakening when he was challenged by the forces of delusion that came at him from the front because the Bodhi tree had his back. He reached down to the earth to claim his ground, that he's entitled to be here. So we need to establish a kind of autonomy, a kind of, among other things, we claim the right to know for ourselves what we think is true. We know our view is always fallible and uncertain, and there are things we're learning, but to take our stand in what we feel we have the right to recognize is actually true, even if it's not safe to say it, but at least in our inner temple we know it's true, as an aspect of autonomy. And another, feeling that our needs have the same standing as others. The golden rule is a two-way street, that if others have rights, we have those same rights. If others have privileges, we have the same privileges. If others have needs, we have the same needs. If the others, their needs have a certain standing, our needs have that standing. I mean, to really own that. So the two go together, to finish here. And I find that this process, as a kind of dance, and also a kind of dynamic in which we're talking about two sides of the same coin, in a sense, of life, living, nature, really altogether. It's to enter into both profound intimacy with other people, just like that, enabled by a profound autonomy and self-respect, and also responsibility for our own agency, that it's on us to be at cause rather than effect, if only inside our own minds, and it's on us to help ourselves and to take responsibility for helping ourselves learn and heal and grow with as steep a growth curve as possible over the course of life. No one else but us can really take charge of that process, which fundamentally and bottom is self-directed neuroplasticity, where you're helping things, your body, change for the better, headquartered by the brain over time, as another aspect of autonomy. And to be able to do this, to be able to both really go into the deep end of the pool around intimacy, and to also, to enable that, maintain your, in a broad sense of the word, autonomy, without mindfulness, you're clueless. I think about Father Thomas Keating, one of the major teachers around centering prayer, Christian monastic. I heard him give a talk one time, deeply impressive person and the real deal. And he said, a life without a contemplative view is a prescription for disaster. And so if we're not mindful, we're not able to track the fleeting changes of expression on the face of the other person. And I think mindfulness is a word that has become very, very elastic, and I think it tends to lose its core meaning. So I tend to go back old school to the original notion of sustained present moment awareness. That's morally neutral. It can be used for good or evil. And it is to be sustained under all conditions. Standing, walking, feeding the baby, driving the car, radically quiet during meditation, dancing, playing, goofing around with friends, arguing with your partner. Mindfulness is to be sustained under all conditions. I think there's been a deep misunderstanding that's kind of inadvertent but problematic, that mindfulness is equated to radically choiceless awareness and nothing else, such that any form of wise effort with the mind is seen as in somehow conflict or at odds with mindfulness or not mindfulness. And that's a misunderstanding. We are to be mindful as we engage wise effort or other sorts of things. So to be able, and mindfulness is to be applied both to external, as it were, objects, in the world, although what we're mindful of is our internally constructed virtual reality, consciousness of that existent other, let's say a person over there. And also we are to direct mindfulness to our own interior, to our own stream of consciousness, our own aggregates, our own, the feeling tone of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, our desires, our longings, and even awareness of self. So mindfulness can be applied both ways. I think of empathy as, externally directed mindfulness, where neurologically, just to do that bit, because it's kind of interesting, we are, let's say, tracking the actions and body language and intentional movements, postures, facial expression of the other person through mirrored neuron systems or mirroring networks. So we're tracking action. We're also in the brain using the insula, which is a part of the brain on both sides of the temporal lobes, to track the emotions of other people. So that's another form of empathic mindfulness. And then we're using prefrontal regions, particularly roughly after our third birthday, to track the thoughts, the intentions, the memories, the dynamics of the other person in real time. So in a sense, my brain and your brain are kind of hooking up, as it were, if we are engaged in a mutually empathic interaction. So yeah, mindfulness is critically important. And last, just to finish, one of the things that mindfulness really gives you in real time, I think about real-time mindfulness, and through training, increasing the granularity of our mindfulness in terms of time and space, being able to track very rapid events that are occurring inside us, quick shifts of thought or feeling or desire, and also a granularity of space. In a sense, we're tuning in ever more precisely into our own bodies. I like the saying from Samuel Bonder, we need to wake down, not just wake up. And that's extremely helpful. And one aspect of that is as you become more internally mindful, you start tracking in real time all the weird little turbochargers that are shaping your reactions to and experience of other people, often rooted in your own childhood, intensifying reactions or distorting reactions or interpreting events in certain ways. You become much more aware of that in real time with a high level of internally directed mindfulness. It also can even tune into what I think of as the inner menagerie. I mean, the truth is the brain evolved over 600 million years, and we have the same architecture. For example, for some of the fundamental motor activities of speaking, shared with fish, from whom we diverged in the evolutionary tree 300, 400 plus million years ago. Let alone, up from the brainstem, moving into, major crocodile elements, and then up into rats and squirrels, the mammalian subcortex, and then the primate human cortex. It's a zoo in there. And in real time, you can start to feel it. You can kind of feel your inner lizard. I don't feel safe, or a certain coldness, right? And you can feel your little inner rat or mouse. I relate very much to our ancient, squirrel great-grandparents, and, living in the trees, hunting at night, surviving the comet hitting or asteroid 65 million years ago, took out the dinosaurs. Too bad dinosaurs, the rats will now inherit the earth, right? And you can feel that part of yourself. And then you can also feel the monkey, so scared, so insecure, wants to be hugged. And including all that. And mindfulness is critically important to be able to do that. I was in a very important and very significant relationship 35 plus years ago. And the person I was in a relationship with was doing a lot of things that were in some ways a betrayal of our understandings. They were very disturbing to the relationship, and they were could be well taken as a kind of attack of one kind or another. And what happened for me was a really interesting thing. I could have done what I had done before in different situations, or people often do, fight back, leave, get all caught up in a conflict. And what came over me was something really different, was the realization that, in a sense, the heart is a kind of muscle, and we can love at will. And through the practice of loving at will, choosing to love, we build that muscle. And what's interesting about it is that one might think at first that it's a way to be a patsy or a doormat. But in fact, what I found was that loving at will, choosing to love, made me stronger, and it actually helped me suffer less what was happening in this relationship. And also, I got to feel that I wasn't getting exhausted by this loving at will, that I was being fueled and protected by it as it flowed through me. That love is love, whether it's flowing in or flowing out. And I think of sometimes people would say, well, that's loving at will is you're making it up. And I think, well, first of all, it's perfectly appropriate to self-generate various beneficial states of mind. Resilience, determination, cultivating compassion, cultivating a commitment to exercise, moderation in the consumption of chocolate. Who knows what that might be, right? There's a place for that. So just because we're self-generating is not problematic. Again, I think that's a misunderstanding that's crept in, that just because procedurally, erratically, profoundly receptive, somewhat inert, non-fabrication with regard to the mind, just because that's a phenomenal procedure or technique or method, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily the only way we should be in life. There's a place for self-generating in a goal-directed kind of way, various wholesome factors of consciousness, factors of awakening, for example, in Buddhism. And so to self-generate love is not right off the bat, problematic. And second, if you think about it, it's doubly loving, because it's loving since it's love, and it's loving because you're valuing it enough to take responsibility for self-generating it. And so what I found about that is that, of course, over time you have to see what the other person does. And I had a little bit of a time limit in the back of my mind. I wasn't going to keep doing this forever. I mean, we had to really see if something could shift in the relationship, and very happily it did. So both can be true. We can both choose to love while also disapproving of the one we love. Or in terms of justice considerations, we can choose to love people who are harming others while at the same time being passionate and fiery in speaking truth to power, or allying with other people to take action against those that are doing wrong and harms. Well, both can be true. If you want to get good at something, study the people that are really good at it. So I've done a lot of rock climbing over the years, and one thing I've done is observe people who are better climbers. How do they move like human geckos up the rock? In the same way, we can observe people who seem to be exemplars, let's say around social justice, social action of various kinds, yet and who also retain a great centered freedom to love in their own heart. They don't get contaminated by hating their adversaries. I think of historically Gandhi, currently the Dalai Lama, Aung San Suu Kyi, people like that, people who are not famous that one can know over time, who just seem to hold on to that lovingness while at the same time being crystal clear in their view and their moral stand. And by observing what they do and how they manage to do it in their own minds, we can then bring it back to ourselves and bring it down to home with raising teenagers who can be very provocative, or dealing with minor or major issues in our personal relationship, or deal with an aging and dementing parent who is getting really grouchy, and yet you love that mother or father dearly. I think of it as the strong heart. It's fairly straightforward to be loving, it's fairly straightforward to be assertive, but to be both. To be both. That's the sweet spot, and that's a challenge. That's what I think a lot of people are reaching for. And one thing that has interested me a lot about this territory is that it's challenging, it's tricky. You have to kind of bring your A game to be able to do it, and therefore it's been especially interesting. It's really neat to see the correlations between various aspects of the mind and various aspects of the brain. To see different blobs, orange blobs usually in light up, as it were, in MRI imagery that correlate with meditative states or with the development of personal qualities like emotional balance. That's pretty neat. But if you think about it, what's useful about it? So what? There's a correlation. Oh, good on you, scientists, but how does that help me with my resentments for other people? And there are certain aspects, though, of the neuroscientific understanding of the mind that are actually really practical and really helpful. And one of the leading examples of that is what scientists call the negativity bias of the brain. Or as I put it in shorthand, we have a brain that's like Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good. The quick version is that as our ancestors were trying to stay alive and keep their babies alive, who could keep their babies alive, they needed to both get carrots, like food, mating opportunities, things like that, as well as avoid sticks, like predators, natural hazards, or aggression inside their band or between bands. Both are important, but the difference is this. If you don't get a carrot today, you'll probably have a chance of one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid that stick today, whack. Lethal consequences, no more carrots forever. Negative stimuli, or the possibility of a negative event, has usually more urgency and impact on raw survival. So we've therefore got a brain that's designed to do 5 things. And this is locked and loaded today when you're dealing with the real world of relationships at work or at home or with friends or family. First, we tend to scan for bad news out there in the world and also inside ourselves and our body, like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Do you still love me, or did I say? We're scanning. 2, if we locate that one tile in the mosaic of reality that's flashing red, tunnel vision, we lock down upon it because we have to deal with it. 3rd, the brain overreacts to it. The brain reacts more intensely to negative stimuli than to equally intense positive stimuli. Red alert. And then 4th, that whole package is fast-tracked into emotional memory, somatic memory, as well as other forms of memory, social memory. Once burned, twice shy. Never forget. So a lot of research shows, for example, that negative interactions in a relationship are much more consequential than positive interactions. Therefore, it's said that there needs to be a multiplier effect for positive moments with your partner or in other forms of relationship. The exact ratio, it's a little controversial, it's probably kind of loose. Initially, John Gottman, one of the first people researching this, talked about a 5-to-1 ratio. And that's pretty intense. When I came across that material in grad school, I thought back on my marriage and I'm like, whoa, how's that for my wife? 5-to-1? I think I need to raise my game, And so that's an example of the ways in which we're designed to overlearn from painful, stressful, harmful experiences relative to beneficial, enjoyable, wholesome experiences. And the 5th thing that happens last is that the brain gets sensitized through the stress hormone cortisol and through other means as well. We become sensitized to the negative so that we react even more intensely to little moments of misunderstanding, little bits of criticism coming at you, or the other person dropping the ball, or yet again forgetting how to load the dishwasher properly after you've told them 10 times. I've been on the receiving end of that. And so the point is that those experiences release cortisol, which sensitizes the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala, 2 of them, one on either side. And then also it tends to weaken nearby region, the hippocampus, that calms down the alarm bell and puts things in context. So that creates a vicious cycle over time. The takeaway from that for me is when you're upset, we get upset, things are unpleasant, something has happened. Nothing I'm saying is about positive thinking. I don't believe in positive thinking. I believe in realistic thinking. The root of suffering, deep root, is ignorance. I think that's also a scientific value of knowing. Science, the Greek roots of the word are about knowing. So we want to know clearly what's really true. So nothing I'm saying is about papering over pain or denying injustice or what's dangerous or bad, to use that word loosely. That said, in relationships, once something painful, difficult, irritating has arisen, it's really important to go mindful in relationship to it as quickly as possible. which means holding that anger or pain or hurt or sadness or loneliness in a space of untroubled awareness. The nature of awareness is that it itself is never tainted or harmed by what it represents. It's like a pond or a field in which some serious crud is happening. So when you do that, you stop the reinforcing of it. The negativity bias then just is, it's like a circuit breaker in effect, and in fact, you're starting to associate. In the famous saying, neurons that fire together wire together. So you are associating. They are firing together the upset with your partner, let's say, or the pulling up of this traumatic memory or collection of experiences from your teen years or early childhood. That's there, but it is being associated with an untroubled, spacious, ongoing, easeful witnessing of it, which then tends to calm and soothe it, especially with repetition over time. So as rapidly as you can, pull out of what I call the red zone, the reactive setting, which is designed by evolution to keep us alive, but there's a lot of collateral damage that comes with it. And we're designed by Mother Nature to get out of that red zone spike of upset as rapidly as possible. Otherwise, we start accumulating what's called allostatic load, which is bad for long-term physical and mental health, as well as we accumulate interpersonal allostatic load. The cuts of the fabric of our relatedness. So after a while, it becomes very frayed, and then the least strong wind can blow it apart. So, point one, when there is some kind of upset running because of the negativity bias, go mindful as fast as you can and help yourself come to a soft landing, not out of suppressing the experience or resisting what's unpleasant, but out of kindness and informed wisdom about how your body works, how your biology really works. There's a kind of humility that respects and surrenders to the biological nature that we are, that is the basis for our consciousness. That's one. And two, again and again and again, when there is an authentically good moment with someone, your coworker, that annoying guy Bob who's on your work team but has a good heart, even though he's annoying, or a moment of friendliness at the deli, or a exchange of a look and a smile with a stranger on the street, or cuddling with your partner, or having a soft landing based on after working through some upset or argument. Several dozen of these moments a day, usually a dozen or so seconds of breath in duration or less, but they're real, and they can be, of course, longer. When we have those moments, given the ways that the brain is like Teflon for the good, help the brain really receive those beneficial experiences. It's a little like, I have a bit of a business background, a balance sheet, you know, assets and liabilities, right? Assets green, liabilities red, let's say. We've got a brain that's loading liabilities in the relational balance sheet, just like that. Bing, 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 bing. To counterbalance that, and in effect just level the playing field, we need to tilt toward the positive, the assets of authentic, good interactive moments or experiences, and then gradually build up that asset base so that when inevitably something happens, it lands or is netted against this huge bank account built up of authentically enjoyable and beneficial experiences with that other person and with people in general, so that you can stay rested in love even as some kind of wave rolls through you of criticism or disdain or rejection or dismissal from another person. So we ask ourselves, what are the foundations of healthy relationships? And to enter into the topic, I'm reminded of the great family therapist, Virginia Satir, no longer alive. And she would do workshops with people in which she would have everybody in the room show, if they were willing to, or bump into others with their belly buttons. And she pointed out that we're universally born with a belly button, which is to say our umbilical connection with our mother. We all have this immediate and tangible and very specific reminder of our socially dependent nature, including in the most fundamental life and death kind of sense. That's the cord through which supplies came into us. And in that context, we, as social beings, all want good, healthy relationships of different kinds and styles. There's a lot of diversity, extroverts, introverts, different kind of cultural norms for relatedness, different settings, different functions that relationships serve. But we are joined, much as we all have a belly button, we all have a longing for satisfying, healthy, supportive, good relationships. So the question then becomes, what causes it? One of the great shared perspectives of both science and the contemplative traditions is that phenomena arise due to causes. So one can then get really interested in mobilizing the positive causes of positive relationships. And I think there are three categories of fundamental beneficial causes or foundations or roots of good relationships. The first of these is virtue. And that's a general term. The root of the word is strength, but more broadly means, take care of your own business. Clean up your own side of the street, or as Google puts it, don't be evil. In other words, however a person defines their own integrity system, manage your own integrity. For me, it's kind of straightforward. Don't be a jerk, right? Or if you are jerky, clean it up as fast as you can. Have a fundamental moral stance in which you are taking care of your own issues and taking responsibility for your impact on other people and operating with some reasonable amount of ethics and morality and integrity, virtue. I think of relationships a lot in terms of what I call the 80-20 rule. Sure, put 20% of your attention on how the other person could clean up their messes better, but put 80% of your awareness on how you can be a better, fill in the blank, parent, spouse, partner, friend, student, coworker, manager, employee. Look to your own side of the street. That's not to be a doormat for other people, but actually it puts you on the moral high ground, and it also is your best odds strategy for eliciting good treatment from other people to practice unilateral virtue on your own side. Obviously, over time you watch and see what they do, but without needing a lot of quid pro quos from other people, I'll change if you change, you first, right? Taking care of your own side of the street, that's a really good way to elicit good behavior, and ultimately, if you don't get it, then you, if possible, adjust the relationship. So, virtue. Second, benevolence. Another fancy word, basically having good wishes for other people rather than ill will. Having a basic stance of warm-heartedness and wishing well. It doesn't mean, again, waiving your own rights or giving up your own needs, or not simultaneously wishing someone well while recognizing that it's appropriate for justice to be served in some way or some consequence to land on the other, with compassion for the impact of that consequence, with also a recognition that it serves the greater good for that consequence to occur. In this complex territory with, in this case, a spotlight on benevolence. So that's where, for me, things like compassion and loving kindness, altruistic joy, sympathetic joy, happiness that they're happy, things like that come in. Third, for lack of a better word, I'll call it engagement. This is the territory of interactive skills and especially repair. One thing I've seen as a long-time couples counselor, dad, husband, friend, business person, business consultant, etc., is that relationships are a lot like a bicycle. You're always falling in one direction or another. The question is, can you repair? So, misattunements, empathic breakdowns, misunderstandings, crankiness, it's the inner menagerie, the inner zoo, the inner lizard or mouse or monkey gets into it or gets hurt. Stuff happens. What then? That's the key question. Can we repair? And I've come to see that repair in as close to real time, as close to the event as possible, done skillfully, is critically important in relationships as one of the major features of engagement. I'll get to a few others in a moment. For me, I would say that the lack of repair in a relationship is a big yellow-orange flag. The unwillingness to repair, the lack of repair, is a total red flag for any kind of significant relationship. And so there are a variety of skills having to do with repair, including forgiveness, also including speaking really firmly and clearly with a strong heart about how one was affected, recognizing the distinction between intent and impact. I can have neutral or positive intent, and yet my impact on the other person could be harmful. Implementing correction. I think of 3 kinds of responses under the heading of repair to the needs of others. I call it moral fault, skillful correction, gracious gift. Moral fault is when, you're right, I do deserve a wince or remorse for what I did to you, or just the way I was negligent or dropped the ball. I really apologize. Then there's a category of skillful correction where, it wasn't that I did something bad, but with the benefit of hindsight, I can see in retrospect how I could have been more skillful, and from now on I'm going to be more skillful. Skillful correction. And that's interesting, because even if the other person is saying bad, 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 and you go, no, I wasn't bad, and I'm going to be more skillful, we can retain a kind of inner freedom to claim and implement, again, out of both benevolence and enlightened self-interest, because it's a fast way to get them off your back, to implement the correction going forward without taking on shame, without taking on remorse. You think I deserve shame for that? I don't. And I'm going to put in some skillful correction, and I'm not going to try to make you believe I am, but watch what I do, and I'm going to do it. Right? And then there's this third category, gracious gift, where it's not that you did something wrong, and it's not even a matter of skillfulness, but they like you to drive slower. Or they just can't stand the smell of mayonnaise. Our daughter hates the smell of mayonnaise. All right, fine. I'm not going to bring mayonnaise to the table with the lid unscrewed from the jar. I'm going to put it on my plate in the kitchen and leave it, and then bring it to the table. Gracious gift. What's the big deal? I don't mean, again, being dominated or abused by other people, but so often in life, it would just make people happier if we just gave it to them. I mean, to be frank, this can be a controversial topic. I'll try to do it in a PG-13 kind of way. In relationships, often there's a different valuing on frequency and length of conversation. Often in relationships, romantic relationships, there's a different valuing around sex. Sometimes those differences seem to load fairly heavily on gender. Not always. Well, is it that big a deal to spend 20 minutes over the course of a day with your partner, maybe in one chunk, maybe spread out, maybe longer, really listening and giving over to a real conversation? Maybe their topic of interest is their sister-in-law, and you're kind of tired of that topic, but too bad. It's benevolent and virtuous, as well as enlightened self-interest, to engage the other person in that way. Flip it around, maybe, at some frequency that feels wholesome and not abusive or controlling or bad. There's a place for some kind of entering into a sort of sensual, erotic territory that maybe is not top of mind, but it's within a range of authentic possibilities. So you think, I'm going to go to the high end of this range, and I'm going to get into it after a while, and when it's it's all good. I mean, I find very often, if we just do that little thing, just do the dishes, right? Or just take on board, I really need to prioritize getting home by a certain time and not get sloppy about that. I need to bring the same impeccableness to my agreements at home that I bring naturally to my agreements at work without even thinking about it, even though it's much more trivial in my value structure than my relations at home. That givingness, that generosity of the heart makes an enormous difference much of the time, and it puts you in a much more solid place to ask for that kind of generosity from the other person. So maybe I'll just say one more thing about engagement. So I've talked so far about repair. I've also talked about, in the context of repair, but also preventing the need for repair An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Leading with generosity for the other person and not being so stingy. Loosening the knots that tighten the purse inside of goodies for the other person. Not to exhaust yourself. Not to exhaust yourself. Not to allow other people to manipulate you around that, but in a way that feels free and wise to do that. In addition to that, the last thing, I find it so interesting is to just treat people well. Without jumping through hoops, but to restrain, a little under the heading of virtue, very routine forms of things like interrupting other people, or being critical, or dropping in tone, harsh tone, that's just uncalled for, or being over-controlling. They're in the middle of doing something, it's going just fine. Do you really need to give them advice? Which has an implicit one-upness in it. Maybe they're about to really drive over the cliff, but short of that, it's going fine, just let it roll. You know, or other things like that. Teenagers, adolescents, not giving unwanted advice. That's not really necessary. Just a little bit of attentiveness to that. And then again, mindfulness is so helpful for that. To be able to track also differences between people. What is irksome for a certain kind of person is not necessarily irksome for a different person. So tuning into what is irksome for that person. And then on that heading, to really sustain an awareness of what the imperative needs are for the other person, or their priorities. Like, to go back to that point about autonomy and intimacy, which does sometimes load on gender due to socialization, if not biology. So, for example, if the other person has a high need for a sustained experience of we-ness, joining, we're together, we're with each other, we're on the same team, we belong to the same tribe. If they have a high need for that, why not do little things that don't cost you much, if anything, to help them keep being reassured of the ongoingness of that critically important thing? Or if you've got to do something challenging with that other person, see if there's a way to establish that sense of relatedness and intimacy, on the basis of which you got to talk about the ways that you're mad at them or something. Flip it around. What if that person has a high need for autonomy? Maybe they grew up, as I did, in a pretty kind of dominating home. So a person like me has become a little prickly about being pushed around, right? Whatever. Or they're just, it's their nature to be quite independent, let's say. If that's true, what are the little things that one could do to that person to not make them feel that autonomy is threatened, or little things one could do with that person to keep reassuring that there's respect for their fundamental freedom to make their own choices, to have agency, on the basis of which there are requests for greater connection.